This particular workshop, the F64 workshop, we arranged for several reasons. For one part, a lot of the leaders, or several of the leaders of F64, are still alive, and they're still vital and dynamic people today. There is great interest in what they did, and I think there's a certain viability to the images that they made even today. Many people see this kind of a landscape and they respond to it very personally, and they'd like to know more about what happened before, and then I think be able to make their own photographs today, departing certainly from those ideas where it's necessary, but in other ways using some of the same ideas and some of the same techniques that F64 used in the 30s.
Well, we're gathered here to discuss Group F64, and I'd like to ask Willard Van Dyke, what was Group F64 and how was it formed?
Well, what it was a collection of friends who liked each other and who decided they wanted to exhibit together. And how it was formed was because I was the youngest one of the bunch, and I needed the identification with my illustrious fellow workers. And one day, my friend Preston Holder and I were coming back from San Francisco, having done some gallery hopping in the afternoon, and the sun was behind us, and it was warm and friendly, and I think we'd had some Italian wine or something. And I said, Press, what we need is an organization that could issue manifestos and write articles and perhaps have a magazine, but most of all exhibit together. And he agreed with me, it was a good idea, and I said, and we'll call it US 256. Well, we, not long after that, Edward came up from Carmel, and I asked Ansel to come over to the studio, and John Paul Edwards was there, and, and Edward married Jeanette Edwards, and Preston and myself, and after we had a couple of glasses of wine, I proposed the idea, and Ansel immediately said, "Oh, that's wonderful, but I don't think the name is so good. People will think we're talking about a highway, US 256, and he said, but after all, that's the uniform system, and in the F system, it's 64." And he took a pencil and he went like that and made that F, put a dot down here, and then the 6 and the 4, and the graphics were beautiful. So it became Group F64.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, there is one thing that I'd just like to perhaps clarify. You hit upon the name for this informal society of Group F64. F64, Ansel, isn't that's the name of the aperture of a lens, isn't it? Can you tell us the relation of that to the aims of this particular society?
Well, we were thoroughly agreed upon the fact that straight photography had great expressive potential. And wonderful things were starting about 1930, 31. F64 seems to be synonymous with great sharpness and depth of field, even with a large camera. Using 8x10, you can use F64, and you really have especially in a contact lens, you have an amazing depth of field. And the illusion, the simulation of sharpness and brilliance, and it just seemed to be a very agreeable term. I think Preston's concept was wonderful. It was just the stop number was a bit archaic.
Yeah.
Because the stop numbers, the U.S. system began with F16, and as you all know that the number of the stop represents how many times the diameter of the stop aperture can be divided into the focal length.
Tell us a little bit about the photographic environment at that time and why you and your friends wanted to preach the gospel, shall we say, of straight photography, and really what is straight photography?
Well, as I remember it, we had agreed upon a kind of way of of doing each one our own thing. And we were a little surprised at the reaction on the part of pictorialists and people like Mortensen and so forth to what we were doing. And at first, I don't think we had any sense of trying to gospelize the thing, did we?
I think we had a sense of mission. I know I did.
Oh, you did.
Full conceit, I can admit it. The pictorial philosophy had bothered me from the very beginning, and I can see the music was the one that gave me some sense of values. That this terribly shallow, sentimental stuff reminded me of someone, say, Victor Herbert as compared to Beethoven. You know, I mean, you just have great substance and spirit. And we felt, and I think Edward had proved by then clearly, that the simple, straight 8x10 print could be one of the most beautiful expressions imaginable. And now I think I've loosened up a little bit in the severe castigation, because we've seen lots of collected so-called pictorial work, like Dassenville, remember? And they have very fine eye. I mean, they saw things, but they couldn't print that way. I mean, it's still the old, you know, fuzzy-wuzzy on the, although some of the prints have a certain beauty. But the Mortensen, of course, he was the target. He was the firing range. And they're still promoting him now and giving him shows. And he's become sort of a period piece.
Well, I think you hit it at one point when you said that we were reacting against bad taste. And I think a lot of the pictorialists were not in bad taste, but he was, in my opinion. His work was disgusting.
Yes, an illustration, furthermore.
Well, I would agree that reacting against bad taste is very good if you can define taste. You can't legally define taste.
No.
But I think people know what we mean.
Well, let's talk about another member, Imogen Cunningham. She came into it as one of the founding members, along with Edward Weston.
I think what had happened to us is she hadn't joined that. He was pretty feisty, but wonderful.
Well, Imogen was not... the idea that we all were doing the same kind of thing, or that we were wedded to the idea of stopping everything down to F64 is just not accurate, because Imogen worked with a smaller camera and didn't have the same kind of interest in technique or the same kind of sense of technique that you had, but she was a very, very good photographer, and we loved having her around because she could needle us.
Good. It was all good.
And then there were some other members. Henry
Alma Lavinson, for one.
Well, she was not a member. She.
I thought she was right in with the boys.
She exhibited with us in the first show. We chose 4 people: Alma, Consuela Kanaga, Preston Holder, and Brett Weston, and they exhibited in the first show. But the founding members were you and Edward and Imogen, myself, and John Paul Edwards, Sonia Noskoviak, and Henry Swift.
Yeah. Henry was sort of a patron member. I mean,
Yes, he collected our works. He was a stockbroker, and he could afford them, especially since in those years we got $15 a piece or something like that for them.
Tremendous.
Now, the important thing of all, it seems to me, brought Group F64 to the attention of the entire nation was the exhibition at the San Francisco, was it the D. Young Museum?
Yes, the MH Young Museum.
Golden Gate Park.
In Golden Gate Park. And that was organized by a man named Lloyd LaPage Rollins.
Happened to be.
He was really interested in photography.
And you know, we received a lot of criticism for showing photography.
Yes, I know.
People wrote the board of trustees, and the artists complained, valuable space in the museum given up to something which isn't art. But they had the whole pictorial salon at the Legion of Honor one here. Tremendous show.
Sure. That, as a matter of fact, that was where
Yeah.
I first saw Edward's work, at that pictorial salon.
In the pictorial. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there was no other place to show, really.
No.
Now, it had a rather short life.
Did
The,
Group F64?
Yes.
From 1932 to 1935.
It seems to me that amazing in that very short time, the influence of this was so strong that it's now become a legendary and used as a definition for a particular approach to photography.
We didn't intend it so,
I'm
but
sure you didn't
but,
intend that at all.
the boy turned out pretty well.
What happened?
Well, it opened people's eyes. I know that profound effect on any number of people who they'd never conceived of anything as strong as a photograph of that kind. You know.
Yes.
And but Rollins had this difficulty with the trustees, and they were very good to him. They just said, "You're the director, and if you think photography is, you know, something should be shown, why you show it." Now, think what happened if they hadn't done that. Suppose he hadn't given us a show. Suppose they cut it off.
We wouldn't be sitting here together.
That's right. I know when we started the Department of Photography at the California School of Fine Arts, we got terrific criticism from all the painters, letters to the trustees. Pencer, who was the president, he just said, "We're going to have a Department of Photography." And they gave us a studio and space in the basement for the darkroom. And the protest was something god awful. You wouldn't believe it. And it really wrecked a lot of good friendships. And then in about a year, it was all, everything was smooth again. And, you know, we were kind of proving ourselves. But it's conspicuous that practically all of the bad, not the bad artists, but the poorer artists were the one that made the greatest protest. A few of the top artists thought it was just great to have it, but the ones that weren't so good couldn't stand the heat of competition. And I feel that the motivation of the group and what it stood for in photography, in one sense, it confirmed my own ideas, gave me a lot of confidence, and it also supported the work. I mean, I would see things for the first time in Western work and in others that I hadn't seen before. And that became part of the education. Because up to the time of F64, I was very fond of Edward, but I did not understand what he was doing. I just admitted I didn't get it. And I had nothing to go back on myself because I was just self-trained and had no position. But with the impetus of the group, sort of the vibrations, a lot of understanding was developed. And that added to confidence, allowed us our manifestos and our vigorous promotions. And I think
our things to cameracraft attacking Mortensen.
Yes. We even motivated the press.
Yeah. Well, I felt that I was the youngest member, and for me it was tremendously satisfying to be able to come to you and have you look at the print and discuss it and suggest changes, or go to Edward and have him give it serious consideration, and show it to Imogen and have her make some wisecrack that would kind of pared it right down. But that kind of exchange was enormously important to me.
We mustn't forget that Willard made some absolutely magnificent photographs before he went into the world of the cinema. And he's now being recognized. I was very happy to hear about the show and everything, and I hope you're continuing, because some of your prints are absolutely wonderful, and in fact superior to any of us. I really feel that in all honesty. You had a direct motive, that a problem you were solving, and I was all mixed up with making a living and doing everything, you know, professional work. Of course, you had your pumps. But I'd like to hear from Willard sometime what his decision to go into the documentary film how that really came about, or whether it was a pull to leave still. Did you have any misgivings of leaving the coast and leaving Edward and the rest of us? And, well, put it this way, people are still asking me, why did I leave piano for photography, and was it a hard pull, you know, was it a trauma? And it was in a little way, but I'm very glad I did. Now, as far as you're concerned, you left still photography and you went east in 1935 to work on documentary film, or film. And how did you feel about that transition? I mean,
Well, I felt I had to do it, and I, for two reasons. One is it was a Depression time, and I felt that that we had to change this world. We couldn't have people starving, and I wanted to play some role in that. And it seemed to me that film might help to promote change more quickly than still photography. And I was mistaken about that, because in my opinion, the documentary films that we made were have perhaps helped a little bit to create an atmosphere in which change might take place. But I think that that photography, your photography, has awakened people to a sense of the importance of the wilderness. And Dorothea Lange's photography changed an attitude toward the rural poor. Walker's did some of that too. But and those are things that you can keep going back to and looking at over and over and over again. With motion pictures, it's ephemeral. I'll bet that there isn't one person out of 100,000 in this country who can remember seeing the river or the city. Those things are up there on the screen and then they're gone. But there's one other reason, and that is I felt that I was that in certain ways I had a competitive thing in relation to Edward, and I didn't want to have that competition, because I feel that competition of that kind sometimes leads to confrontation if it goes on long enough, and I didn't want it, and so that was another reason. I think also he was the champ, and the competition was a little silly on my part.
Well, I don't know at that time. You were pretty darn good, friend. But do you think that the F64 experience in any way affected the film vision?
Oh, there's no question of it. Of course it did. But it was interesting because at first I kept trying to make beautiful shots out of everything. And I had to realize that that the sequence had to add up to be something beautiful, that the single shot merely kind of stopped the flow. And it took me a time to get over that. But
it's Strand's wave. The wave.
Strand's wave. Yeah, the wave. Oh, no,
some beautiful things, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Where are those films now? Are they still available? I mean,
yes, they are. The Museum of Modern Art still circulates all of them, and the City, which Ralph Steiner and I made in 1938, 39, that has made more money for the Museum of Modern Art film circulation than anything in the department.
Well, I think it was a great experience. I think that it's affected literally millions of people. We had no knowledge or anticipation of any such effect.
No.
But I think that the spirit of it had a rather profound influence on photography and continues to. I'm distressed now that a lot of the contemporary work, it seems so careless. I mean, there seems to be no dedication to the medium itself, if you know what I mean that way. It's,
yeah.
Almost any kind of a print goes, almost any kind of a seeing goes. It's a sort of a solitaire game.
Yes.
I find it very depressing. once in a while, there's a good guy. Somebody comes. I was saddened to hear Lizette Modell. You know, some of her work I admired tremendously. And people can't understand why I can't like her, because it doesn't look like F64.
Oh.
But it feels like F64, you know. We couldn't have a group like F64 if it was any larger. It would either go to a club, which would be anathema, or it would go to some organization, which then would be self-propagating, you know, self-developing. And before we know it, we'd have been an institution in a large sense, and probably very ineffective. But I know that in different areas, I'm sure in Santa Fe, you could have a very fine little group come together and make a definition.
But let me tell you about that. Somebody from New York who runs a big kind of concerned photography operation there came down to Santa Fe and called a meeting of the photographers. Now, there are some good photographers in Santa Fe, there's no question of it. Well, by the time he'd finished 15 minutes of his exhortation to get together and work together and be concerned together and so forth, the auditorium was empty. And the photographers simply walked out.
Oh,
Isn't that true?
I think I know who you mean.
True of Santa Fe. It's just not a joy as a place at all.
It's not.
I had a visit from a man who runs a photographic agency in New York and is also interested in the crafts, and he said that they couldn't understand that in Santa Fe that people didn't get together, and he introduced two weavers that didn't know each other, very highly skilled weavers, and said they had a great time. Why don't you get photographers together? And I said, we just don't do it that way.
No. I don't know.
It couldn't be formal, it could be informal.
Yeah,
But why imitate?
yeah. Well, there is another thing. In those days, if you sold your print for $10, the kind of competition was not very great among us, you know. We had to earn our living some other way. But today, when in Santa Fe there are 3 photographers who customarily sell their prints for over $1,000 apiece. And there just isn't the impulse to get together. They feel competitive with each other, and so they sort of
strange.
hide off in corners, and they don't tell you about which gallery is good and which gallery is bad, and so on.
Well,
It's very different. Happy birthday,
2 cases ought to be enough for openers.
You've all got cameras in your hand, that's the problem.
Thank you, sir.
it's awfully hard to find something simple to say. And this puts me in mind of a trip that we had up to, I think it was Scarsdale. And we sat out under the tree at Sheila's place, and we had some food, and served tea with vodka in it afterwards. And during that time, as I remember, one of the mighty fine Siamese cats was annoyed at a dog that came, so he thought Beaumont was a tree. And he climbed up Beaumont, and he landed on the top of his head, dug in with all 4 12 claws, whatever they had. And you were expressing yourself in the most dignified. I think you were speaking Italian. But anyway, I think that just to make up sentiments, when the sentiment is so deep, it's very hard to even think of the proper thing to write. I would like to offer a toast to one of the great gentlemen of photography, one of the great scholars, and rapidly turning out to be one of the great photographers. And I think it's magnificent that he should be with us today here in this beautiful place, to which he has many fond memories with Edward Weston in the 40s, celebrating return to youth. I would like, I'm definitely your senior, sir. And I never thought I'd be talking to you and that you were 75. But anyway, I would like to propose a toast. All possible good wishes to Beaumont, and hope you can come back here for your 76th, 77th, 80th, 85th, 90. Then when he says 90, then I give it to Cunningham and put him in a book. You're
To
very
Beaumont.
good help.
At one workshop about 7 years ago in Yosemite, it was discovered that I had also had a birthday, and we celebrated together with the French photographer Brassai, at which point you made that beautiful portrait of him. And I would like to toast the director and the staff and the friends and the students and everybody connected with the Friends of Photography. I am simply delighted. I guess all of you have got the news that we were announced. We were announced in
Today's Chronicle.
morning, today's Chronicle by that great photographer Snoopy. And Snoopy says the place we're going to on our photo hike is called Point Lobos. And Snoopy considers this. That means Point of the Sea Wolves. And he runs away. Right, and said, well, there isn't any point bunnies. Well, this may be a coincidence, but I really think it was planted by Swan.
Beaumont, a few friends of yours from around the country have chosen to honor you today and send some notes to Beaumont Newhall. Congratulations to photography's preeminent historian on the occasion of his 75th birthday, with the admiration and best wishes of Jim Enyart and the staff of the Center for Creative Photography. One from Tokyo, Japan. The president of the Friends of Photography, Peter Bunnell, writes, urgent.
Yes, Peter.
Greetings and best wishes for your birthday. Your Japanese friends also send their greetings. I wish I could be with you there, but Tokyo is also incredible. Regards, Peter Bunnell.
Thank you very much, and then I also thank the sculptor of this very beautiful camera. I rather think it must be a wet plate loaded with this champagne.
I like the blue filter.